a bit weird to see Microsoft on stage during an open source conference, right? Actually, you'll see that it's not that weird because Microsoft is working a lot in the open source area, and especially with the beginning of our cloud offerings and the Windows Azure in production. So the objective of the presentation is to show you how we can work with open source and especially with JONAS, and how JONAS works on our cloud platform called Azure. And actually it works very well. As you've heard, I'm an old IBM employee, and I also successfully installed and run WebSphere within Azure. But it's much more difficult to install WebSphere than to install JONAS, because JONAS is a lightweight J2EE server, and you can script everything with JONAS, including the installation of all the components required for JONAS. So it's actually very easy to install it within a platform as a service concept like Azure. So yes, Microsoft and the open source. As I said, Microsoft is doing a lot of things around open source, and we've created this site called Interoperability Bridges in order to bridge the technologies, the Microsoft technologies, with open source. And actually, if you go and look at all the applications that runs on our Windows Azure platform, you'll see that many of the applications that runs on Azure are actually written in open source languages, and they run on top of PHP or Tomcat application servers. Many of the applications that runs on top of Windows Azure actually are, for example, applications that serves as backends for mobile, like the iPads and the GSM mobiles. And many also other application runs in interaction with Facebook, for example. And most of these applications are written in PHP. So we've done a lot, and we are, for example, we are one of the biggest contributors to the Linux kernel, especially in order to integrate Linux with Hyper-V, or hypervisors. So you'll see lots of contribution of Microsoft and more contribution of Microsoft in the open source area. Regarding Azure, I don't know if you know Azure already. Azure is a worldwide platform as a service. Microsoft has built this platform from nothing. I mean, we built the data centers. We re-architectured the operating system. There is a kind of special operating system running on the platform. It's called the Fabric Controller. It's a bit like Linux or Windows, but the difference is that it doesn't run at the server level. It runs at the data center level. And I don't know if you know a lot about Microsoft skills in running data centers. I was not aware about that when I was in IBM. But when I joined Microsoft a year ago, I was surprised by how many services and how many data centers Microsoft runs. I mean, I think Google is still the first in terms of how many data centers they run. But Microsoft has its own data centers, and all the services, you know, like Hotmail, messengers, the updates of all the Windows servers and workstations, even the services like Xbox Live, they are all running on many Microsoft data centers that Microsoft owns and runs. And Azure is implemented into 6 data centers. We have 2 data centers in Europe, 2 in the US, and 2 in Asia. And you'll see that when you create services or applications on Azure, or when you store data on Azure, you choose your data center. You select the data center onto which you want your application to run. It's designed to host many types of applications at a very high level of availability. It's designed for production of applications, and it's designed to scale up in order to host a big web applications, for example, or application servicing many thousands or millions of mobiles all around the world. It's a platform as a service, so you know the concept. Basically, Azure takes care about everything underneath the application. So there is no need to manage the infrastructure, no need to manage the operating system. We take care about everything. If there is any patching, you know that we patch Windows a bit, I would say once a month, and all of these patching mechanisms are done transparently for all the applications on top of Azure. It's a platform as a service, so it's not infrastructure as a service. It's not like you put a VM on Azure. You have to program for Azure. And you program for Azure. There is no special API. Some new APIs, I would say, to access the storage environment. But in order to create an application for Azure, it has to run on Windows servers, but there is no specific APIs to create an application for Azure. You just have to create your application like it will run on a farm of server or on clusters. And you can write your application for sure on .NET, but also on Java, PHP. There is a rule. If the things you want to run runs on Windows, then it will run on Azure. That's the only rule to have in mind. About JONAS, how we did it is we have several ways to integrate applications within Azure. If this is very difficult to install, then we have a role called the VM role, with which you have to create a VM into which you install everything you need, especially if there is lots of actions manually done. For example, for WebSphere, actually it's very difficult to install. You have to run the code and then reboot the machine, and then you also have to configure and then start WebSphere, and then you have something working. So you cannot script all of that. I mean, it could be done, but with a lot of efforts. Fortunately, with JONAS, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, you can script everything. So it fits very well into the platform as a service model. And as you may understand, when you run on the platform as a service, you start a VM. Actually, it's not you starting the VM. The operating system of the platform as a service starts the VM for you when it's needed. And then when the VM is on and ready, then the operating system of the PaaS will start the installation of all the needed middleware. If I need a JONAS server, for example, then Azure will after the boot of the machine, Azure will start the installation of JONAS automatically for me, install the JONAS, and then with all the prerequisites, and then install the application on top of JONAS. And all of this is done without the interaction of the users. So this is exactly what we've done. There is no difference between the installation of a JONAS application on Azure and a .NET application. So basically, we do not talk about VMs on Azure. We talk about roles because as we are on the platform as a service concept, we do not talk VM. We do not manipulate VMs. And a role is more than a VM. Actually, a role is a group of VMs. It's a cluster of VMs managed by Azure with a load balancer in front of the clusters. And all of this piece of infrastructure are managed automatically as a whole called a role. And then this is exactly what we do when we install JONAS. We just create a cluster of machines, of Windows machines. And then the same way we did with .NET, we do the same with JONAS. We just download the package from somewhere within the data center, a storage area somewhere, and launch the installation of JONAS. And when it's ready, we just join the machine to the clusters, and that's it. So how much does it cost? Because it was a question we often have, as nothing is free within the even within the cloud area. You have to talk about how much costs an installation. So I took an example, and this is the example I took. Suppose that you want or you need to have a web application that needs two big servers, because it's a big application. So it's two servers running 2 cores, big cores, with 3.5 gigabytes of memory each. So you have 2 big servers running in a cluster. In front of the 2 servers, you have a load balancer, and you are used with the way cloud systems are priced. So you know that everything is as a price in a cloud. So if suppose that you need a big space of storage in order to store videos or files, I took 500 gigabytes of storage. And then you also are billed for the traffic, all the bytes that go out of the data center. So I took 1 terabyte of bytes. And then if you price all of that on Windows Azure, it will cost you $581 per month in order to run all of this infrastructure on top of Azure. Actually, all the prices are public, so there is a link here, and there is a kind of calculators in order for you to estimate the cost of a given platform. So today we are in a phase of the project where we demonstrated the ability to run effectively JONAS on Azure, but we are still some actions to do in order to fully validate JONAS, because you will need, for example, performances figures in order to select the right machines, considering the application you want to run. So this is what we have to do. We have to test the performances of JONAS on the different VMs we have on Azure in order to give figures to you. And then we have also services to the applications. There is a SQL service. It's based on SQL Server, but it's not really SQL Server. It's an installation of SQL Server somewhere in our data centers, in our Azure data centers. And when you need a server, it takes you about 15 seconds to have a load balanced replicated SQL servers. And we created a JDBC driver for this SQL Azure environment. So I have to test that within JONAS in order to validate that we can access SQL Azure through this driver. And I also have to work with Bell in order to validate the installation and the upgrade of the applications. If you want to, for example, upgrade a full cluster of JONAS 7 on Azure in just one step, we need to work a bit in order to automate that. So let me just show you the Azure console and how JONAS works on it. This is the console. Through the console, it's the administration console, and through the console, I can manipulate my cloud environment from all the 6 data centers. It really depends on me to choose the one I want to work with.